Hi, everyone. I'm Madeline from the Brain Trainer team, and I'm excited to welcome you to the second episode of our new series, 404 Policy Not Found. Today's episode features a special guest, Seher Shafiq, Global Engagement Manager at the Mozilla Foundation, the nonprofit behind Firefox and the Mozilla Festival. In this episode, we'll dive into Seher's journey from the civic nonprofit world to the forefront of responsible tech, discuss the future of ethical AI and digital rights in today's world, and take a closer look at Mozilla's mission and the purpose behind Mozilla Festival, a global gathering dedicated to building a more inclusive and equitable internet. All right, let's jump in.
All right, welcome everybody. We're back again this week in this episode. And again, at the Brain Trainer podcast, we want to explore ideas. We want to talk to brilliant minds who are shaping the future, who are looking into things like ethical innovation. And today, on that regard, we have Seher Shafiq, who is the Global Engagement Manager at Mozilla Foundation. You would have heard more about her in the intro of this episode, but so that we're just gonna dive in right into. So, Alex, take it away.
Such a pleasure to have you here and be able to share space with you and learn from your experiences. And we usually like to start off by understanding a little bit about people's journey. Why do they end up where they are now, and especially in the emerging technology space that we're in as well. So, what really drew you from the civic nonprofit space into kind of responsible technology and your interest there, especially globally focused?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation. So I started my career in the Toronto nonprofit space. So I started working at small nonprofits. I ran a leadership development program, and then I was doing some volunteering for civic engagement in starting in 2015. And through that, I learned a lot about local issues and Canadian issues, and I became really involved in Canadian politics for the first time. And so that was kind of my segue into the civic stuff, which eventually led to where I am now. But essentially, I worked for about, I want to say, 8 to 10 years in the nonprofit and civic space. And around 2019, I was working on a nonpartisan federal campaign to promote voter engagement amongst community-based organizations. And it was around 2019 and then the years following that I learned a lot about the rise of misinformation and disinformation online. And at that time, it was mostly being spread through things like Twitter and Facebook. And now we have so many more tools that cause disinformation. But at that time, I realized that it was going to make a really big impact on how people engage civically and learn about civic and political issues. And I just intentionally decided to do a career pivot. So in 20, what year was it? In 2022, yes, 2022, I just made the decision that I wanted to switch sectors and work in tech. And I spent the whole year applying to jobs, getting lots of rejections because I was moving into a completely new sector that spoke totally different language. And yeah, the role that I'm in now was like a miraculously perfect fit because it was in the tech space, it was kind of civic related, and the role itself was a community building role that involved program management and leading and facilitating a program as well. So it just worked out really perfectly. And then, just for context, what my role actually is, I work at Mozilla Foundation on the Mozilla Festival team, which is our largest public facing event. And I design and lead the co design program for the festival, whereby we will work with the world's trustworthy AI experts in different sectors. And then we lean on them to tell us what are the emerging trends in trustworthy AI, and using their ideas, we co-design the festival's themes and sessions. And it's a very decentralized process where they make a lot of the decisions about the festival and what it looks like. So I lead that program. So you can see the connection between nonprofit program management and then what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, maybe I can poke in a little bit because a lot of things stand out when somebody looks at you. Like, just truthfully, I used deep research in Google Gemini and I did like I built a whole profile of you, just what it's able to pick up, right? And of course, one of the things stands out is like, of course, responsible AI. Just getting into the topic, responsible AI, trustworthy AI. From your perspective, right, like one of the recent news that's actually high up in my mind when it comes to that right now is the recent Meta executive whistleblower Sarah Wynne Williams. I'm sure you have seen, heard all about it to the news. But from your perspective, like from the work you do, like what does like trustworthy AI or what do rigid digital rights look like, or what is how does it how can we frame, because you have a lot of experience in this, for the audiences, like what is responsible AI, trustworthy AI, and digital rights look like in our engagement with the technology now?
I think what I've learned in this role is that the answer to that question really depends on your social location. And I mean that metaphorically, like like who you are, in terms of your age, your gender, your class level, your race, but also your physical location. So working across different regions, I've learned that in Europe, for example, AI legislation is top of mind for people, at least working in this space. It's very much about how do we get consumer rights built into AI legislation and that sort of thing. Whereas when I worked in Eastern and Southern Africa for 2 Mozilla festivals that we held there over the last few years, the focus was very much on labor rights and bringing awareness to things like data labeling and content moderation farms, where big tech companies outsource a lot of this work for very cheap with a lot of ethical issues as well. And so that's very top of mind for people, as well as things like having a seat at the decision-making table, because all of the big tech companies are based in based in and largely engaged in Europe and North America. So those are 2 examples of how I think the answer to that question really depends on where you live. And then in terms of like social location, there are studies that show that the lower somebody's income is, or the less educated they are, the less digital literacy they have, along with like civic literacy and stuff like that as well. So responsible and trustworthy AI means something different to somebody who we want to enable them to fully understand how AI systems work so that they can protect their data, for example, and make informed choices about how they're engaging in these tech systems. So yeah, that doesn't directly answer your question. I think what I've learned in this role, working with so many different types of people, is that this is such a like huge issue that spans so many different sectors, so many different issues, and there's a lot of nuance to it.
Yeah, I want to jump in there, Sahara. Just thanks for bringing up those points. I mean, I think there's we've seen the labor move from companies like Meta in-house to being outsourced to companies, third companies in Canada, or sorry, in the US, but then to overseas, very much in order to, avoid the kind of obligations that they would have in North America. So this is sort of an intentional kind of exploitation of jurisdictional, protections in order to try to, reduce costs for businesses. And so what can how does Mozilla and how do people address those kinds of issues because of this intentional sort of exploitation of those gaps?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many layers to that, because there's legislation and regulation questions involved on who holds these companies to account. There's jurisdictional stuff, like if the companies are based in the US and there's a third party that's been contracted to do the data labeling work, whose responsibility is it? Of course, the big companies always say it's not our responsibility. Yeah, we could get into that.
Sorry.
And now I've lost my train of thought. Your original question was.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just, there are, your point was, I guess, that there's very different perspectives around what you care about the most depends a lot on where you are. And a lot of that is a product of the fact that there's, exploitations of jurisdictional obligations. And so I guess, and so there's a couple of parts to that question. There's a part that is like, how do we avoid, companies just exploiting people who don't have good protections? And that's sort of not a you problem or a Mozilla problem. That's obviously like a global issue. How do we start to think about that? But then you were also talking about the layer of companies, of people basically not having basic digital literacy, and needing to now contend with a much
more complex set of issues than they would have had to before. So there's a lot of big gaps that we need to fill, I suppose, is maybe the bigger question that I'm asking. And so like, how do we start to, how do we kind of maybe start to navigate the fact that there's such big gaps?
Yeah, I think if I can like summarize the different buckets that come to mind, one is regulation. So regulating what big tech companies can do so that it doesn't have the impacts that we're seeing right now. Legislation, which is somewhat connected, but embedding consumer rights protections into legislation, which Mozilla has done a lot of work on in the past, especially in Europe, and we do a lot of advocacy in the US as well. And then digital literacy, like just having everyday people be aware that this is an issue, because this work is moving forward so quickly that people don't really realize that when you click accept on terms of what do they call them? The privacy policy. The privacy policies. There's other terms too. I can't remember right now. Terms of reference. Anyway, you know what I mean? Like you open a new app, you have to click accept, or sometimes they update it and you have to be like, okay, and you're not reading it because you just want to get to the TikTok or you want to use the Riverside platform.
And there's no choice. It's really just like
no choice. Yeah. And it's like in a moment where you need to like use that thing. So yeah, just digital literacy is the third pillar of everyday people having awareness that this is all happening.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject? I know, Alex, sorry, I know you have to say, but
no problem.
Like you had just this moment just now, we're just talking about, right? You couldn't access the link to the Riverside platform because it asked you to use Chrome, right? So we were just thinking, like, she's probably just thinking about all her work. Like, this is the kind of stuff that shouldn't happen, right? Like, can you comment on that? This is like this just happened to us now. Like, this is
yeah. It just happened. So Mozilla, I work for the company that makes Firefox the browser. So I use Firefox obviously on my work computer, especially even off my work computer now. And I tried to access this platform, and it told me this morning, it was like you can only record if you have Chrome and Edge. And I thought, well, I'm not recording, so let's see what happens when I join the thing. So I joined it, and it was like, you can't use this until you download Chrome. So I downloaded Chrome, and I don't want to use Chrome because Chrome tracks you and there's all sorts of privacy things that's not the case for Firefox, which is a bit of a plug. But I was forced to download Chrome so that we could have this conversation and I wouldn't be even more late. So like we all have moments like this all the time. And I'm not thinking through all of that. I'm just making a quick decision in the moment.
Yeah.
I want to bring it to some of the work that you're doing around MozFest, because a lot of the work that I do is try to bring together multidisciplinary teams to really start thinking about not just the technology, but how do we implement technology for thematic areas from really that approach in terms of multidisciplinary teams. At MozFest, you have technologists, you have activists, you have a wide array, not coming from just multidisciplinary disciplines, but all from different regions. And you recently introduced me to Cha Mabongo, who works with Mozilla in Kenya, who is amazing and really shared with me something that's happened there in the last year in terms of the government tracking payment systems, and really has catalyzed conversation around privacy and data sovereignty. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, because you're organizing an event like that is multidisciplinary, that is coming from other regions, how do you see your role in that almost being like a living lab where we can start sharing those type of reflections that are really useful for us here and globally?
Yeah, it's interesting that you called it a lab, because I often refer to the program I run as a petri dish. The program is called the Wrangler program. The idea is that it's a decentralized program model called federated design, where kind of like what I explained earlier, we decentralized the co-design of festival planning to the Wranglers, who are distributed in different regions of the world. And yeah, it's very much a petri dish, because there's people from different regions, like I said, but also we'll curate a cohort that is across different sectors as well, so that it's not all developers and data scientists, so that it's not all activists and artists, it's not all policymakers, it's not all product product people or entrepreneurs, but actually a mix of all of those. And then if you add on that the layer of geographical diversity, you get a petri dish. You get this, the other metaphor I've used is a kaleidoscope. Like if you look at Trustworthy AI from just one of those 25 people, you'll see one angle. But when you add in the 25 layers or the 30 layers, however many people we have in the cohort, you get this like very, jumbled is not the right word, but like a mosaic that is a lot more nuanced, and you can see it in a lot of different ways. And what it creates together is it's just more layered and more nuanced than if you had just one or two or three or even five of those people. So anyways, I'm going on my tangent again, but yes, that is the model that we take. And as a result of that, the festival themes and the sessions that come through each of those Wranglers networks ends up being a very different end product than if it was just Mozilla staff organizing the festival.
One of the things that I usually like to talk about, actually, literally today I had a presentation where I was framing it this way, and it's just like there's a concentration of power by a couple of companies. Like we're talking about Google and Google Chrome, right? Google is one of them, valuated at trillions of dollars, which you can even like say like look at the GDP in some of the G7 countries. And one of the things that happened earlier this year was the Paris AI Action Summit, which I'm sure you were all aware of. That was in there, 61 signatories of nations referencing open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, and secure, trustworthy AI, prioritizing market competition. And one of the rhetorics, as I heard, I don't know if you heard J.D. Vance speak at the AI Summit in Paris, talk about a lot of like AI deregulation, right? Like just like focus on the free market innovation. We have to compete with China. And so from that, and I know that your work centers on democracy and impact of AI. I also wrote an article today using AI to analyze the political platforms of all the parties, NDP, liberals, and conservative. And one of the things stood out is like looking at the conservatives, just focusing, and this is like quoting in the document. It says, this is what like's been said in the conservatives. Excessive regulation stifles innovation. Canada's tech future should be built by entrepreneurs, not bureaucrats. So also let's talk about, deregulation and like seeing regulation, especially implemented laws around AI, because we have to compete with China, to be something that is a direction of specific groups of people, like it's different in the US. So can you I'm sure you have a lot to say on that, but can you comment on that, on the deregulation, the AI race, and why is that important for democracy? How does that affect democracy, etc.?
Yeah. Wow, really easy questions. I think I'll answer that by connecting it to what's happening in Canada and what Canada's role can be, because that's something that, working at a global company but living in Canada, I think about a lot, and I try to make an effort to stay connected to the AI ecosystem in Canada as well, and to make those bridges. I am so frustrated by this dichotomy of it's either regulation or it's innovation. And there's no in between. I don't know. There's some people working in the in between, but I feel like there's a really big opportunity to build out that middle section a lot more. And right now it's a very polarized space in Canada. I was at an event a few weeks ago, and I was just observing that it is just so polarized. The people that are working in this space, yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that. It's very polarized. That was very surprising to me as someone that's fairly new, a few years into this space. Mm-hmm. I think Canada, as a country that has the world's leading research in the foundations of what AI tools we use now, like in neural networks, has an opportunity to also play a leading role in things like building trustworthy AI and all the things that come with it, including, but not just, regulation. And with the US saying that they now want to focus more on innovation and all of the things that you just said, it actually opens up an opportunity for Canada to play a multilateral role and to convene other countries and play a leadership role on the global stage, given we already have a longstanding history of being a leader in industry and research, we can also work on regulation and trustworthy AI initiatives as well. It doesn't have to be either or, and one doesn't have to come at the expense of the other.
Yeah, I mean, let me build on that a little bit. I mean, I think that certainly, I think the polarization, of course, is intentional. When you polarize, and it becomes much harder to regulate. And so the question is then, how do we actually bring conversations in to the fore that are kind of this middle ground, that aren't this compromise? Because I think actually it is, as you say, it's a false dichotomy. We can actually build and innovate a lot better if we're doing it safely. There's lots of history around how we've regulated cigarettes, there was a lot of pushback on cigarettes. There was a lot of pushback on regulating railroads. Railroads were concentrated power. That's infrastructure. We're talking about infrastructure here, and infrastructure embeds inequality. And so there's, these are challenging conversations. I do think, I think when Musk was sort of, really starting to show his colors, it really actually started to change perception. So some people in the policy side saw an opportunity because Musk was starting to say the quiet part out loud, and that's even louder now still with Donald Trump and with the tech bros standing behind him at the inauguration. So I do feel like there's a salience at this moment in time that was not there even for a lot. I think in the civil society space this was probably very clear, but for normal people who don't think about this on a day-to-day basis, I think a lot of this is coming into a crystallization that wasn't there before. So I guess my question then is, how do we take advantage of that moment and mobilize? And you talk about bilateralism, multilateralism. I 100% agree on that. How do we do that? How do we move people into action? What are some of the steps, or what are some of the opportunities that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think participating at the global stage and convening other countries to form something like a coalition of some sort that we lead is an opportunity that is there. I think that there are opportunities to create world-class programs, and like some of that has already started, but programs where people can upskill and integrate building product with responsible design, like even from a technical perspective, there's an opportunity to build in these kinds of principles into civil society so that community-based organizations can educate their clients about, the risks involved. There are opportunities to, I mean, this is a spicy one in Canada, but there's opportunities with legislation when it comes to these kinds of things to enshrine consumer protection rights and trustworthy AI norms into that legislation and be a global leader in that way, especially with the US doing what they're doing. Like, there are so many opportunities. And what you're talking about reminded me a couple of weeks ago, I was on this panel. I was on a panel with a man from industry, and he was of the opinion that because Canada is not playing at the same economic level when it comes to developing AI as some other countries, that we don't have a say in trustworthy AI and regulation and pushing this narrative forward. And I think it's so important to disrupt narratives like that, because that's not true. In fact, it's the opposite. A, it's never been more pressing to take action on things like this, and B, it's never been a better time. Like, when else would there be an opportunity where the US is backing off and we have a robust industry in Ontario, especially in Toronto, plus an opportunity to build on that and become a thought leader and a leader in legislation for issues like this.
I would go as far as to say that when you do what is right, that is to say, such as to be inclusive, right? When you deprioritize DEI, for example, which is also being happening, you're not being inclusive. But when you're being inclusive, like inevitably you're gonna get a better output in how you approach things, because it's gonna be more complete, right? AI works with context. When it has more context, it becomes better. So if you what we're saying, do inclusive, prioritize EDI and other things, very aligned to Canadian values, because I think of like Canada as a Canadian as well, migrating from Peru. That I just think of Canada as a very multicultural, and I do feel like it has been thoroughly more multicultural than the experience that I had in the States. But there's certain things that we can leverage, as you said, see the opportunity, and I think better AI can actually come out when you're adding to those areas, including the indigenous groups, for example, like nurturing that connection. There's very good insight and wisdom that can come in by including more groups into it, have a complete ecosystem, so to speak. Anyways, Alex.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's also so on brand for Canada. I mean, I studied international relations and I went to the U of T. So I heard over and over about how Canada's traditionally had a reputation on the global stage for being a peacekeeper, and playing a very multilateral role. And, you can argue that that hasn't always been the case more recently. Like, fine, we can have that. We can that can be true, but it's also true that at the global stage, historically, that has been what people see of Canada, and this is an opportunity to play that role and
Yeah.
stay true to those values.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that we've kind of got this US context, we've got the EU context, and we've got a Chinese context. And so but there's a lot of other countries in the world that are in between there that are basically left out if you basically cede the entire conversation to those countries. And so, I think, I know that there's sort of been, Canada has relations like the, G7 or the G6, but I really hope that there's kind of a lot more engagement of the global majority as well. Like there's more, talking with Brazil and perhaps with India and looking at how do you expand, although India itself is obviously a large country too, but how do you build on those, like maybe South Korea, Japan, like there's a lot of other countries that are I think trying to lead themselves on this. So I feel like there's also some opportunity to find to play a convening role, but then there's also strategic places that smaller countries can make. And so yeah, I think that that's like an exciting idea. I mean, how do you see MozFest and places like events like that contributing to building that conversation and moving that type of idea forward?
Well, MozFest is hundreds of conversations with thousands of people. At least this year, our big global festival is going to be that. So it's a place where we dig into the nuances of everything that I'm talking about in a lot more detail and also add that layer of geographical diversity. And it's also a place where collaborators can find other collaborators to actually advance the work beyond just the festival. The festival is just a moment in time. It's a place where we bring people together and kind of light this spark so that that spark can continue and turn into a fire and create something that is more long lasting. So that's a short. I'm looking at time and I'm like, oh, that's the shortest way that I will answer that question.
I want to go back to a little bit what you said about the potential for Canada, because I want to say that we should not assume that Canada is as stable as it is when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're seeing ripple effects of what's happening in the US here. Like we have the potential to lean into that, but we see large foundation, for example, Suncor Foundation, that has done a lot of tech for good work in Canada that's now pulling out, largely because of what's happening in the US. So we need to be protective of that approach. And yes, we can lead, but I think understanding in an environment where the erosion of DEI is happening rapidly, how can we actually lean into it and strengthen it? Not because it's ticking boxes, but because it's actually strengthening. I think that's why you mentioned that Canada can be a bridge. And I would be really excited to explore, because Mozilla Foundation is in Canada, but is really globally facing, not necessarily focused on Canada. How can we build those bridges together? Because as we're working with, for example, social economy through social inclusion and network for Black communities, or the strength that we are seeing in the Indigenous AI ecosystem here, we have the chance to lead, and we are diverse, and we have really connections internationally through working with Mozilla Foundation that already are working internationally. How can we effectuate that bridge building really effectively?
Well, I'm no DEI expert, though I've worked in the DEI connected space many years ago. The case study that comes to mind that I learned about all those years ago is, let's say you have a sidewalk and then you build like a ramp or like a divot in it so that somebody with accessibility issues doesn't have to like climb a stair. and I'm probably going to butcher where this case study is from. And if I find it, or if it was an anecdote, I'll cite it appropriately. But I remember the image of this example. So what happens when you do that is, yes, it's good for people that have a wheelchair, but it's also good for people who have a stroller. And it's also good for people who are sore that day and or injured. You design something for a particular demographic for accessibility or inclusivity, and actually a lot more people benefit. The net benefit is much larger than just who you're designing for. And I think with AI systems, it's important to look at it, well, with all systems really, to look at DEI or inclusivity or whatever words you want to use. But inclusivity, I guess, is the heart of it, is to look at it from that perspective. It's not always we're giving just, one person a leg up. There's a lot of data to show that when you do that, there are more benefits for everybody as well, and it benefits society as a whole. So in the case of AI, like if you simplify a privacy policy, it benefits a large amount of people, not just the people that might have literacy issues, for example. It also makes it more readable for people that don't have a law degree. I don't know, that's the easiest example that comes to mind, but I think that's the concept. That's how I would think about those things.
And I think that the leaning into why diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't buzzwords. They're really there for a reason, and they strengthen innovation. They strengthen perspective. And when we're looking at AI, that's often Western focused. The models are Western, largely aside from like Chinese models through DeepSeek and everything. So moving towards respecting localized models, LLMs that are trained on data sets that could have oral traditions, for example, that really respect diversity is really important.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on just that. And I could recommend people that could talk about language inclusion in AI, because you're right, a huge, huge issue. Mozilla has a Common Voice program where we focus on exactly just that. Yeah, that's a whole thing that is also.
I might jump in there too, because I mean, I think, as Seher, I've had I remember last year I was at a conference in Montreal, and it was on AI and human rights, and there's one tone there, and then you go to the responsible AI conference, and there's a lot of people talking about responsible AI in a technical way, and then you go to the kind of conferences that are more tech bro oriented, and it's more like outright contempt, and I think that I was spending a bunch of time trying to figure out if I thought it was worse to be having people pretending to be sort of doing responsibility or sort of being outright contempt. I think I don't think I have a clear answer, but I think I've landed on maybe there's some value in the outright contempt, because at least you know where people stand. And it feels like to me like the same thing is true on DEI. I mean, as we're seeing all these policies roll back at the corporate level, like you kind of see how thin they were in the first place, and how little was there, how little commitment and substance was there within a lot of the companies. And so, I do feel like there's going to come a moment where the tide is going to change on where we are right now. And so I think having that there helps us to kind of think through how to make that more sustainable going forward. I guess I wonder if you have a question, any thoughts on how do we rebuild in a stronger way so that you're building sort of momentum and sort of support along the way as we go. I know.
Where do I start? Honestly, I think you raised really good points.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what stands out with what you said is, I mean, this is not going to fully answer your question, but just to respond to what you said, what stands out is this idea that at least you know what the other person is saying, because then you can, not in a nefarious way, but use that to your advantage. Like if I know that a data scientist or an engineer thinks that advocacy on trustworthy AI is silly or a waste of time, or why are you spending so much time on putting together a festival? Then I can logically build out an argument to respond to that and convince them otherwise. Whereas if I don't know, then I can't do that. So I think there's coming back to the polarization conversation, there's some bridge building, and we're also speaking a lot of different language when people are working in different sectors. So just, yeah, bridge building and level setting between different perspectives.
Yeah, thanks.
We are coming to our last segment. We could talk for a long time, I'm sure. But so this is just a sort of open question. Anybody, but like Seher's take, of course. At the intersection of technology, civic engagement, and human rights, and like thinking about policy, and thinking that like maybe like in order to think about policy should, I think from my perspective, be strategic. Like there should be a strategy, and policy should support that vision strategy, right? When you think about future, and I think about AI in society, like what sort of like what gives you most hope, and also on the same token, what sort of like keeps you up at night, like what worries you the most, and what gives you the most hope when it comes to the future and AI in society?
I mean, in this moment, I guess it's somewhat AI related. It's related to how I got into the AI space, which is civic engagement. And what gives me hope is seeing that in our election, we had the record number of people show up for advanced polls. And there's so much happening in the world right now. There's so much apathy. A lot of it is driven by technology. A lot of it is driven by the things that we just talked about happening south of the border. And what gives me hope is that people are still taking time out of their day to go and cast their ballot and be engaged in issues and be informed, and just show up. So that was really inspiring. I don't know, by the time this is posted, probably we'll have the outcome of the election. Maybe my statement won't hold, but today that is what gives me hope. What keeps me up at night is seeing patterns of power being replicated in the way AI and tech is developed. So whether that's a discrepancy between like the haves and the have-nots, if you will, when it comes to like digital literacy and access to technology and yeah, access to technology, I'll say that. Or the global north versus global south, or global majority, if you want to call it that, the discrepancy between how decisions are made, who has power, who gets exploited. One thing I didn't mention is how conflict minerals, no one talks about how conflict minerals are used in the chips that are used to power and develop AI. That's all coming largely from the Congo and Africa. I heard a panelist at Mozilla Festival say that Africa is funding the world, and I can't unsee that anymore. And I'll share his name after this so we can include it in the notes, because I want to make sure to give him credit for that. But anyways, yes, so just seeing how power imbalances are being replicated and sometimes perpetuated, that is what really keeps me up at night.
I think we repeated it several times on our podcast, but Victor Boles talks about the socialization of losses and privatization of rewards, and the extractive nature of what you just mentioned is exactly fitting to that. And we'll leave it open for closing thoughts, but we'll close it off now, and just anything that you want to share that's going on at Mozilla Foundation going forward, or if you had like a magic wand that you would want to see either from our ecosystems happening or internationally, feel free to share.
Yeah, I think I'll just go back to Canada's role on the global stage and Canada's role not on the global stage in fostering a community of people that are working on responsible and trustworthy AI, and just reinforcing that point that it doesn't have to come at the expense of innovation. I have not met anyone working in this space who says we don't want innovation. We don't want Canada's economy to thrive. Like, I think there's again bridge building that should be done, and I would love to just like have more conversations about that and help that space as much as possible. And then the other piece about Mozilla Festival is coming November 7th to 9th in Barcelona. We are expecting thousands of people, hundreds of sessions on all things relating to the climate impact of AI, issues around privacy and security, regulation and legislation is another one of our themes. Power imbalances in AI systems and tech systems. So much of what we talked about today. There's going to be even more nuanced conversations. And it's in Barcelona. I don't know if I mentioned that. So it's also going to be beautiful. So that will be my plug.
Great. I'll make sure to pass it on to lots of people who should be there and being part of that conversation, trying to make sure that we're building towards, this more nuanced world and this more collaborative spirit that you're talking about.
Okay, so with this, I think we're just gonna close it. I just wanna thank you, Seher, for being with us, having this conversation, talk about. I think one of the things that stands out for me is civic engagement, and just like for me, it's like trying to build agency in people and just see like they have a role to play. They're not excluded, to become included, and in that including other groups that are currently not on tables. But yeah, I hope the listeners enjoy this conversation as we all did here, and we're looking to speak with more of you in the future, and we'll share in the notes all links and all stuff so you can engage with her and Seher's work.
Cool, thank you. This is really fun. Thanks for having me.
Bye bye.